My name is Beatrice. I'm 54 years old, and I learned the hardest lesson of my life while lying in a hospital bed with tubes running through my chest. For 26 years, I believed my son Brandon was the one person I could trust with everything. I gave him my love, my resources, and my faith. The beach house in Malibu, where his father and I had built our dreams together, where we'd watched sunrises paint the Pacific Ocean gold, where every corner held memories of Gerald's laughter, that house was worth $2.3 million. dollars. I never imagined that while surgeons fought to save my heart, my own son would be stealing the home that held it. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want to hear stories about real people facing real challenges. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this story unfolds. The ending will surprise you. I need to take you back a bit so you understand what this house meant to me and why losing it felt like losing Gerald all over again. I'm an architect. I've spent 30 years designing homes for other people, but the beach house was different. Gerald and I bought it in 1998 for $780,000. Back then, it felt like an impossible dream. 3 stories of white wood and glass perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. The top floor was Gerald's studio, where he'd paint for hours, capturing the way light danced on water. The middle floor held our bedroom with French doors that opened to a balcony. I'd wake up every morning to the sound of waves and the smell of salt air. The ground floor had a kitchen where I'd experiment with recipes, usually failing while Gerald laughed and ordered takeout instead. The garden was my project. I planted rose bushes that Gerald said would never survive the coastal wind. He was wrong. They thrived. Every spring, they bloomed in shades of coral and cream, and the scent of those roses mixed with the jasmine I planted near the gate. On summer evenings, we'd sit on the deck with cheap wine and expensive cheese, watching the sun sink into the ocean, turning everything amber and gold. When Gerald died 5 years ago, the cancer took him in 6 brutal months. I watched the strongest man I'd ever known become a shadow. After the funeral, I couldn't sell the house. People told me it was too big for one person, too expensive to maintain, too full of ghosts. They were right about the ghosts, but those ghosts were the only family I had left. I'd sit in his studio, surrounded by his unfinished paintings, and feel close to him. The house wasn't just a building, it was the last place where Gerald and I existed together. Brandon is our only child. 29 years old, working in real estate, always chasing the next big opportunity. I'll be honest, I spoiled him. After Gerald died, Brandon was all I had. When he was young, I gave him everything he wanted. Private school college without student loans, a car for his 16th birthday. Gerald used to warn me that I was making him soft, teaching him that money solved problems instead of hard work. I didn't listen. I thought love meant removing obstacles. Brandon married Monica 2 years ago. She's 27, works as a fashion blogger, and lives her entire life on Instagram. Everything is about appearances with her. The right clothes, the right restaurants, the right backdrop for photos. At first I tried to like her. I really did. But she looked at everything, including me, as either useful or irrelevant. I was useful when she needed a location for a photo shoot. My beach house appeared on her Instagram with captions about living the dream and blessed life. She never mentioned it was my house, not hers. The warning signs started about 6 months before my surgery. Brandon called one evening asking to borrow $50,000. He said it was for a business investment, a sure thing. I didn't ask questions. I just transferred the money. When he said he'd pay me back, I told him not to worry about it. That's what mothers do, right? We give without expecting return. But after that, something shifted. Brandon started visiting more often, which should have made me happy. Instead, his visits felt calculated. He'd walk through the house slowly, almost like he was measuring it. He'd ask strange questions. How much did I pay in property taxes? Had I updated my insurance? Where did I keep important documents? I told myself he was being responsible, looking out for his aging mother. The truth sitting right in front of me, and I was too blind to see it. Then came the chest pain. 3 months before everything fell apart, I was in the garden pruning the roses when it felt like someone had wrapped steel bands around my ribs. I couldn't breathe. I sat down on the stone bench Gerald had installed, trying to convince myself it was just indigestion. It wasn't. Dr. Helen Martinez became my cardiologist. She's a small woman with enormous confidence, the kind of doctor who tells you the truth without flinching. After running tests, she sat me down in her office with my results spread across her desk. "Your mitral valve is failing," she said. "You need surgery. Soon." I asked her what soon meant. "Within the month," she said. "This isn't something we can manage with medication. Your heart is working too hard. Without surgery, you're looking at heart failure." I asked about the risks. She didn't sugarcoat it. "It's major surgery. Open heart. We'll put you on bypass, stop your heart, replace the valve, restart everything. You'll be in the ICU for at least a week." The success rate is good, about 60% for someone your age with your health history. But there are risks. Infection, stroke, complications from anesthesia. 60%. I went home that night and sat in Gerald's studio looking at his paintings. I thought about dying on that operating table. I thought about Brandon inheriting everything. That part didn't scare me. He was my son. Everything I had was supposed to be his eventually. I called my lawyer, an old colleague named Thomas Wright, and updated my will. Everything to Brandon. The house, my savings, my retirement accounts. I organized my files, made sure all the paperwork was clear. I wanted to make it easy for him if I didn't wake up. Then I called Brandon and asked him to come over. We sat on the deck, the same spot where Gerald and I used to watch sunsets. I told him about the surgery. He looked genuinely scared, and that comforted me. He held my hand and said all the right things. He'd be there at the hospital. He'd take care of everything. I wasn't allowed to worry about anything except getting better. Before he left, we went to my home office. I showed him where I kept important documents: birth certificates, insurance policies, banking information. The deed to the house was in a safe built into the wall behind a painting. I gave him the combination, just in case I said. He nodded solemnly and wrote it down. Looking back now, I can see how his eyes lingered on that safe, how he asked me to repeat the combination twice to make sure he had it right. At the time, I thought he was being careful. I didn't recognize hunger. The week before surgery felt like living underwater. Everything moved slowly, sounds were muffled, and I couldn't quite catch my breath. Brandon and Monica came to visit 3 days before I was scheduled to go into the hospital. It was a Saturday afternoon. Monica was wearing white linen pants and a silk blouse, completely impractical for a beach house visit. She carried her phone everywhere, stopping to take photos. She photographed the living room with its ocean view. She photographed the deck. She even photographed the kitchen, rearranging my fruit bowl to make it more aesthetic. "Just making memories with you," she said when I asked what she was doing. "You know, in case I died," she meant. She didn't say it, but we both knew. Brandon was in my office for a long time. When I went to check on him, he was sitting at my desk looking through papers. He jumped when I walked in. "Just familiarizing myself with everything," he said, "like you asked me to." But I hadn't asked him to do that yet. The surgery wasn't for 3 more days. He stood up and walked over to me, putting his hands on my shoulders. "Mom, where exactly do you keep the deed? I want to make sure I know just in case something happens and I need to access it quickly." The way he said it made something cold settle in my stomach, but I pushed the feeling away. This was Brandon, my son. He was worried about me, that's all. I showed him the safe behind Gerald's painting of the Malibu coast. I opened it and showed him the deed, the title, all the ownership documents. He stared at them for a long time. "Can I take these?" he asked. "Just to keep them safe." I hesitated. Something in his voice didn't sound right, but Monica called from the other room, asking Brandon to take a photo of her on the deck, and the moment passed. I told him the documents were fine where they were. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. After they left, I sat in the house feeling uneasy. I walked to the office and checked the safe. Everything was still there. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of upcoming surgery was making me imagine things. 3 days later, I drove myself to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Brandon had promised to take me, but he called that morning saying he had an emergency meeting he couldn't miss, a deal that couldn't wait. He'd come by the hospital later, he said. I told him it was fine, that I understood. I didn't want to be a burden. The pre-op process is designed to strip away your dignity. They take your clothes, your jewelry, everything that makes you yourself. They dress you in a gown that doesn't close properly. They mark your chest with a marker, an X over your heart like a target. Nurses come and go, checking vitals, asking the same questions over and over. Are you allergic to anything? When did you last eat? Do you understand the risks? Yes. I understood the risks. I might not wake up. I might wake up different, damaged. I might have a stroke and lose the ability to speak or move. I understood all of it. The night before surgery, I couldn't sleep. The hospital room was cold and the machines beeped constantly. I thought about Gerald, wondered if I'd see him again. I'd never been religious, but lying in that bed, I prayed. Not for myself, for Brandon. I prayed that if I died, he'd be okay. That he'd use the inheritance wisely. That he'd find happiness. I wrote him a letter on hospital stationery. My handwriting was shaky. Brandon, if you're reading this, I didn't make it. I want you to know that everything I have is yours. The house, the money, all of it. I just wish I had more time with you. Build a good life. Make your father proud. I love you more than anything. Mom. I sealed it and gave it to the nurse to put with my personal effects. The morning of surgery arrived gray and cold. They wheeled me down long corridors, fluorescent lights passing overhead like a countdown. Dr. Martinez was in the pre-op area already in her scrubs. She squeezed my hand. You're strong, Beatrice, she said. I'll see you on the other side. The anesthesiologist introduced himself. He explained what would happen. A mask over my face, a cold feeling in my arm, then nothing. I tried to stay calm as they wheeled me into the operating room. It was colder than I expected, bright and full of equipment I didn't understand. People moved around me, preparing. Someone adjusted the mask over my face. Count backward from 10, a voice said. I got to 7 before the world went black. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that at the exact moment they were cutting open my chest, Brandon was at my house. He had a key. He'd made a copy years ago without telling me. He went straight to my office, straight to the safe. He took the deed, the title, all the ownership documents. He had an appointment with a notary public who didn't ask too many questions. He had papers, already prepared contracts with my signature, except I'd never signed them. Someone had forged my handwriting. Someone who'd seen my signature hundreds of times, who'd watched me sign birthday cards and checks. While my heart was stopped, while machines breathed for me and pumped my blood, Brandon was selling my house. But I knew none of this. I was in a darkness so complete it felt like being erased. Time didn't exist. There was no pain, no thought, no fear, just nothing. Waking up after open heart surgery isn't like waking up from sleep. It's like clawing your way up from the bottom of a deep, dark ocean. You're drowning, fighting for air, and then suddenly you break the surface. Except the surface is pain. Everything hurts. Your chest feels like it's been crushed. There are tubes in your throat and you can't breathe on your own. You can't speak. You can't move without setting off alarms. I opened my eyes to bright lights and the sound of machines. A nurse's face appeared above me, calm and professional. You're in the ICU, she said slowly, like I might not understand. The surgery went well. Don't try to talk. You still have the breathing tube. We'll take it out soon. I wanted to ask about Brandon. I wanted to know if my son had come. But I couldn't form words, couldn't do anything but lie there and exist in the pain. They removed the breathing tube the next day. It felt like they were pulling my lungs out through my throat. I coughed until I thought my chest would split open. But being able to breathe on my own, that was everything. Being able to speak, even though my voice sounded like gravel, that made me feel human again. Brandon came to visit on the 3rd day. I was still in the ICU, still connected to monitors, still weak enough that lifting my hand felt like climbing a mountain. He walked in holding flowers, lilies. I've always hated lilies. He should have known that. He kissed my forehead and sat down in the chair beside the bed. He looked tired, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. How are you feeling, Mom? He asked. I told him I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, but I was alive. He laughed, but it sounded forced. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. He told me about his work about a property he was trying to close on. He talked about Monica, about her latest Instagram campaign. He didn't ask about my recovery, about what the doctors had said about when I might go home. After 20 minutes, he checked his phone and said he had to leave. A meeting he couldn't miss. I watched him walk out of the ICU, and something felt wrong. The way he'd avoided looking at me, the tension in his shoulders. but I was on so many pain medications that I couldn't hold on to the thought. My friend Margaret came to visit later that same day. Margaret and I have been friends for 30 years. She's a retired school teacher, practical and no nonsense. She brought me a book and chocolates, both of which the nurses immediately confiscated. She sat beside my bed and held my hand. "You gave us all a scare," she said. I told her I'd given myself a scare too. We talked about inconsequential things, hospital food, and terrible daytime television. Then she mentioned casually that she'd driven past my house the day before. "I saw Brandon there with some men in suits," she said, "and a moving truck. I thought maybe he was helping you clear out some things, getting the house ready for when you come home." My newly repaired heart started beating faster. The monitor beside my bed beeped a warning. "What kind of moving truck?" I asked. Margaret shrugged. "One of those big ones. Allied Van Lines, I think. Is everything okay?" I told her everything was fine. Brandon was probably just storing some things for me, being helpful. But my hands were shaking. After Margaret left, I used the phone beside my bed to call Brandon. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me back. 2 hours later, he sent a text. "Everything's fine, Mom. Just taking care of some things at the house. Don't worry, focus on getting better." But I did worry. I worried all night. The nurses kept coming in because my blood pressure was elevated, my heart rate irregular. They thought it was post-surgical complications. They didn't know it was fear. I was moved out of the ICU after 5 days and into a regular recovery room. The pain was manageable now with medication. I could walk short distances with help. Dr. Martinez said I was healing well, that I'd probably go home in another week. 2 weeks after surgery, I was finally discharged. The hospital arranged for a car service to take me home since I couldn't drive yet. The entire ride back to Malibu, I stared out the window watching the Pacific Ocean come into view. I tried to feel excited about going home, but that unease from Margaret's comment wouldn't leave me. The car pulled up to my house. Nothing looked different from the outside. Same white wood, same glass windows, same rose bushes blooming beside the gate. I paid the driver and walked slowly up the path. Every step hurt. My chest felt fragile, like it might crack open. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. At first, everything seemed normal. The furniture was all there, the paintings on the walls. But then, I started noticing small things. The rug in the living room was slightly askew. Books on the shelves were out of order. Picture frames had been moved and put back in the wrong spots. I walked to my office, my chest getting tighter with each step. The painting of the Malibu coast was crooked. I lifted it with shaking hands. The safe was open. Empty. All my documents gone. The deed, the title, insurance papers, everything. I stood there staring at that empty safe, trying to make sense of it. Maybe Brandon had taken them for safekeeping. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. I turned to leave the office and saw the trash can. It was full, which was odd because I always emptied it before leaving the house. I bent down, pain shooting through my chest, and pulled out crumpled papers. Receipts, printed emails, and then, at the bottom, a copy of a contract. My hand shook so badly I could barely read it, but the words were clear enough. Purchase and sale agreement. The property at my address. Seller Beatrice Anderson. Buyer Coastal Investments, LLC. Purchase price $2.3 million. Date of signing 3 days after my surgery. The day I was still in the ICU, still intubated, still fighting for my life. I looked at the signature line, Beatrice Anderson, in handwriting that looked like mine but wasn't quite right. The loops were too big. The slant was wrong. Someone had forged my signature. My son had forged my signature. I collapsed into my desk chair. The contract clutched in my hands. The room spun. I couldn't breathe, and for a moment I thought I was having a heart attack, that my new valve had failed. But this wasn't physical. This was worse. This was my son, my only child, the person I'd loved more than anyone except Gerald, stealing from me while I was unconscious. I called Brandon. The phone rang and rang. Finally, he answered. "Mom, hey, are you home? How are you feeling?" My voice, when I spoke, didn't sound like mine. "We need to talk." "About what?" He sounded wary. "About my house, about Coastal Investments, about the papers you took from my safe." Silence on the other end of the line, long enough that I thought he'd hung up. Then, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Brandon. I found the contract. I know what you did. Mom, you're confused. The surgery, the medications, they can mess with your memory. We should talk about this when you're feeling better. I'm not confused, I said. I know exactly what you did. You sold my house while I was in the hospital. You forged my signature. I was trying to help, he said, and now there was anger in his voice. You have no idea how much that house costs to maintain. The property taxes alone are crushing. I was protecting your assets. By stealing them. I'm not stealing anything. I'm your son. Everything you have is going to be mine anyway. I just accelerated the timeline. I couldn't speak. Those words, that casual admission, it felt like being cut open again. Except this time, there was no anesthesia, no merciful darkness. I have to go, Brandon said. We'll talk later when you're not so emotional. He hung up. I sat in my office holding a dead phone, staring at a forged contract, trying to understand how I'd raised someone capable of this. The house around me felt different now. Violated. I walked through rooms that had been mine for 26 years and they felt like they belonged to someone else. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, my chest aching, my heart, both the physical and metaphorical one, broken. I thought about calling the police. I thought about calling my lawyer. I thought about confronting Brandon again, but mostly I thought about Gerald, about what he'd say if he could see this. He'd warned me about spoiling Brandon, about making him think the world owed him something. I'd dismissed those warnings. Now I was paying for it. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to let Brandon see me as a victim. I was going to be smart about this, strategic. If my son wanted to play games with legal documents and forged signatures, then I'd play too. But I'd play to win. I made myself coffee, even though lifting the pot hurt my chest. I sat at the kitchen table with the forged contract spread in front of me. I read it carefully, looking for any detail that might be useful. Coastal Investments, LLC. I didn't recognize the name, but I knew how to find out who owned it. The contract listed a business address in Beverly Hills. There was a notary seal stamped and signed legitimizing the fraud. I called Lawrence Kim. We'd worked together 15 years ago on a commercial development project. He was the best real estate attorney I knew, meticulous and ruthless when necessary. His secretary tried to tell me he was booked for weeks, but I insisted. I told her it was urgent, that it involved fraud. She put me through. Beatrice, Lawrence said, his voice warm. I heard about your surgery. How are you recovering? I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I told him everything. The forged signature, the sale, while I was unconscious, Brandon's admission that he'd done it. Lawrence listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, Can you come to my office? Bring every document you have. Bring your hospital records showing when you were in surgery. I need to see everything. When? I asked. This afternoon, if you can manage it. I drove myself to his office in downtown Los Angeles, even though I probably shouldn't have been driving yet. Every bump in the road sent pain through my chest, but the physical pain was nothing compared to what I was feeling inside. Lawrence's office occupied the 20th floor of a glass tower. The view stretched from downtown to the ocean. He met me at the door, took one look at me, and guided me to a chair. You look terrible, he said bluntly. Open heart surgery will do that. I spread the documents across his conference table. The forged contract, my hospital admission records, the discharge summary showing I'd been incapacitated. Lawrence put on reading glasses and examined everything carefully. After 30 minutes of silence, he sat back. This is fraud, Beatrice, he said. Forgery exploitation of an incapacitated person. Your son could face serious criminal charges, prison time. I don't want him in prison, I said automatically. I just want this fixed. I want my house back. Lawrence looked at me over his glasses. Are you sure? Because what he did is unforgivable. He waited until you were at your most vulnerable. He's still my son. That makes it worse, not better. I didn't disagree, but the thought of Brandon in prison, that wasn't something I could bear. Lawrence made some calls. He put me on speaker so I could hear. He called the county recorder's office. He called the title company that had processed the sale. He called a private investigator he sometimes used. Over the next 2 hours, We pieced together what Brandon had done. Coastal Investments, LLC, was a shell company created 3 months before my surgery. The registered members were Brandon Anderson and Monica Anderson. They'd created a fake company to buy my house from me using forged documents. The $2.3 million had been transferred into an account in the name of Coastal Investments, then immediately moved into personal accounts controlled by Brandon. The investigator pulled recent transactions. Brandon had bought a Porsche, $180,000. Monica had purchased jewelry from Cartier, $50,000. They'd put down a $400,000 deposit on a villa in Palm Springs. They'd spent over $600,000 of my money in 2 weeks. I sat in Lawrence's office watching the afternoon sun turn the glass towers gold and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. Brandon had planned this for months. He'd created a company. He'd prepared forged documents. He'd waited for me to be helpless. "What do we do?" I asked Lawrence. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "We have 2 options. Criminal prosecution, which is what this deserves. Or we void the sale, prove it was fraudulent, and force them to return everything. Either way, they're going to lose the money they spent. They'll have to sell the Porsche, return the jewelry, forfeit the deposit on the villa. How long will it take to void the sale? If we move fast, 2 to 3 weeks. The evidence is overwhelming. No judge will uphold a contract signed by someone who was literally unconscious at the time. And Brandon won't know we're doing this." Lawrence smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Not until we're ready to tell him." That's when the idea started forming. Brandon had thrown a party when Gerald died, called it a celebration of life. He'd invited everyone we knew, showed off, played the grieving son while accepting condolences and drinking expensive whiskey. The whole thing had made me sick. If Brandon wanted to celebrate stealing from me, I'd let him. I'd wait. I'd be patient. I'd let him think he'd won. "How long until we have all the legal documents ready?" I asked Lawrence. "A week, maybe 10 days if the title company drags their feet." "Make it 2 weeks," I said. "I want everything perfect, ironclad, and I want one more thing." "What's that?" "I want to be there when you tell him." Lawrence studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Okay, 2 weeks, but Beatrice, are you sure you want to do this confronting him directly? It's going to be painful." "Not as painful as what he did to me," I said. "I hired a private investigator, Detective Raymond Foster. He was a former LAPD detective who now did private work mostly for lawyers. Lawrence recommended him, said he was discreet and thorough. I met Raymond in a coffee shop in Santa Monica. He was in his 60s. Gray hair, kind eyes that had seen too much. I showed him photos of Brandon and Monica. I gave him their address, the name of the shell company, everything I knew. His job was simple. Follow them. Document. Everything. I wanted to know where they went, what they bought, who they met with. Raymond called me 3 days later. "You're not going to like this," he said. He met me at my house with a folder full of photos. Brandon and Monica at Morton's Steakhouse, $100 steaks and $300 bottles of wine. Brandon at a Mercedes dealership looking at a GLS SUV. Monica at a spa in Beverly Hills walking out with shopping bags. More jewelry, more clothes. But the worst photo was of them at a realtor's office. Through the window, Raymond had captured them looking at property listings, pointing at photos of commercial spaces. Brandon had his arm around Monica. They were both smiling. "They're planning to start their own real estate investment company," Raymond said. "Anderson Realty Group. I checked the business filings. They submitted incorporation papers last week. They're planning a launch party next month at the Marina del Rey Yacht Club." A launch party. With my money, and a yacht club I could never afford on my architect's salary, using the inheritance they'd stolen while I was fighting for my life. "Get me the details of that party," I said. "Everything. Date, time, guest list if you can." Raymond looked at me carefully. "What are you planning?" "I'm going to give my son exactly what he deserves." The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I had to pretend everything was normal. Brandon called a few times, checking in on my recovery. I kept my voice light, told him I was feeling better. I didn't mention the house, didn't mention anything I'd discovered. When he invited me to his launch party, I accepted immediately. "Mom, that's great," he said, sounding genuinely pleased. "It means a lot that you'll be there. This is a big moment for Monica and me, a new chapter. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I said. I met with Lawrence every other day. He showed me documents, explained legal procedures. The case was simple. I'd been incapacitated at the time of the alleged sale. The signature was forged. The contract was void. The title company had already agreed that the transfer had been fraudulent. They'd cooperate fully, which meant Brandon and Monica would have to return the money. Except they'd already spent $600,000. They'd have to sell everything. The Porsche would go back to the dealership probably at a loss. The jewelry would have to be returned or sold. The deposit on the Palm Springs villa was non-refundable. They'd lose it all. What about criminal charges? Lawrence asked. You still have that option. What Brandon did meets the legal definition of elder abuse fraud forgery. The district attorney would be interested. I thought about it. I really did. Part of me wanted to see Brandon face consequences, real consequences for what he'd done. But another part of me, the part that was still his mother, couldn't do it. No criminal charges, I said. But I want him to know what he did. I want him to face it publicly, in front of everyone he invited to celebrate with stolen money. That's harsh, Lawrence said. Not as harsh as selling your mother's house while she's on a ventilator. The night before the party, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, my chest still aching from the surgery, thinking about what would happen. I'd face my son in front of all his friends and business associates. I'd expose what he'd done. I'd watch his new life built on fraud collapse. But easy wasn't the same as right, and pain, I'd learned, was sometimes necessary. The Marina del Rey Yacht Club sits right on the water, all white columns and glass walls and boats bobbing in their slips. I arrived at 7 in the evening, just as the sun was starting to set. The parking lot was full of expensive cars. BMWs, Mercedes, a few Teslas. Brandon's new Porsche, gleaming black, parked in a spot labeled reserved. I'd worn a simple black dress, no jewelry except the wedding ring I still wore even though Gerald had been gone 5 years. I looked in the rearview mirror before getting out of the car. Pale, thin. The surgery had aged me. I looked every one of my 54 years, and then some. Lawrence and Raymond were waiting near the entrance. Lawrence wore a suit. Raymond wore slacks and a blazer, but he had the bearing of a cop. People could tell what he was just by looking at him. Are you ready? Lawrence asked. No, I said, but let's do it anyway. The party was on the second floor, a ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the marina. The sun had turned everything orange and gold. There must have been 80 people inside holding champagne glasses, talking in clusters. A bartender was pouring drinks. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of appetizers. I walked in and nobody noticed me at first. I was just another middle-aged woman in a black dress. I stood near the entrance looking for Brandon. He was at the far end of the room, standing on a small raised platform with Monica beside him. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost $2,000. Monica wore red silk, her hair styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. They looked successful, happy, like people who had it all figured out. Someone tapped a microphone. The sound echoed through the room. Conversations died down. People turned toward the platform. Brandon cleared his throat and smiled. That smile, God help me, it still looked like the smile of the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. Thank you all for coming tonight, he said. His voice was confident, practiced. This is a dream come true for Monica and me. Starting Anderson Realty Group has been a journey, and we couldn't have done it without the support of amazing people. People applauded politely. Brandon continued talking about his vision for the company, about making luxury real estate accessible, about building something meaningful. He was good at this, charismatic. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed him. Then he said the words that made my hands clench into fists. I want to thank my mother, Beatrice, for believing in me. He scanned the room. Mom, where are you? I raised my hand slowly, heads turned. The spotlight operator found me, and suddenly, I was illuminated standing near the entrance in my simple black dress, while everyone else was dressed for celebration. There she is, Brandon said, his smile widening. Mom, come up here. I walked through the crowd. People moved aside. I climbed the 3 steps to the platform. Brandon hugged me. It felt like being embraced by a stranger. My mom gave me the foundation I needed, Brandon said into the microphone, still holding me. She gave me her house in Malibu, her support, her belief. She taught me that family means everything. He looked down at me. Mom, I promise I'll make you proud. The crowd applauded. Some people smiled at me. I saw pity in their faces. Poor woman giving up her home to help her son. How generous, how selfless. Brandon handed me the microphone. Do you want to say anything? I took it. My hand was steady. I looked out at all those faces, strangers, mostly people who thought they were celebrating a success story. Thank you, Brandon, I said. My voice echoed through the room. But I need to correct something you just said. Brandon's smile flickered. Just for a second. Mom, not now. You said I gave you my house. I turned to face him fully. That's not quite accurate. The room had gone very quiet. Monica's face had lost color. You sold my house while I was unconscious after heart surgery. I turned back to the crowd. 3 days post-op, I was in the ICU, intubated. When the documents were supposedly signed, I physically could not hold a pen. I couldn't even breathe on my own. Murmurs rippled through the room. Brandon tried to take the microphone back. Mom, you're confused. Let me explain. I stepped away from him, keeping the microphone. You forged my signature. You created a shell company, Coastal Investments, LLC, and sold my house to yourself for $2.3 million. Someone gasped. Conversations erupted. Brandon's face had gone from pale to red. That's not true, he said loudly. She signed the papers. She wanted me to have the house. I reached into my purse and pulled out the documents Lawrence had prepared. I held them up. This is the forged contract. See this signature? I was in a hospital bed when this was supposedly signed. I pulled out another document. These are my hospital records, showing exactly where I was and what condition I was in. I walked to the edge of the platform and handed both documents to a man in the front row. He looked at them, his eyes widening, and passed them to the person next to him. The papers made their way through the crowd. Brandon grabbed my arm. Stop this. You're making a scene. I pulled away from him. You sold my house. You took $2.3 million. Then you spent over $600,000 in 2 weeks. A Porsche, jewelry, a villa you can't afford. Monica was crying now, mascara running down her face. Brandon, you said it was legal. You said she signed everything. I did what I had to do, Brandon said. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the crowd, trying to salvage something. She was going to lose that house anyway. Property taxes, maintenance, she couldn't afford it. I was helping her. By forging documents while I was in surgery, my voice was louder now, sharper. By stealing from your own mother. You were going to give it to me eventually anyway, he shouted. Everything you have is supposed to be mine. I'm your son. I just took what was already mine. The room erupted, people talking over each other, some backing away, others pressing closer to hear better. Brandon realized what he'd just admitted. His face changed panic, replacing anger. I didn't mean it like that, he said, but his voice was lost in the noise. I turned to the crowd one more time. But here's what my son didn't know. I had their complete attention now, 80 people silent waiting. 3 years ago, after my husband died, I transferred the actual ownership of that house into an irrevocable trust, the Gerald Anderson Memorial Trust. The deed Brandon forged. It was worthless. You can't sell property you don't own. Brandon swayed. He actually swayed like he might fall over. The house Brandon sold doesn't legally belong to me on paper, I continued. It belongs to a trust with designated trustees and beneficiaries. You can't sell trust property with a forged personal deed. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. The company that bought the house, Coastal Investments. I pulled out more documents. My attorney investigated. Brandon and Monica created that company. They sold my house to themselves with forged documents. They paid themselves $2.3 million with money that should have stayed in the trust. Monica was sobbing openly now. Some woman near her offered a tissue, then thought better of it and backed away. Brandon looked at me. Really looked at me, and I saw the moment he realized he'd lost. Everything. The house, the money, the company he'd built on fraud, the reputation he'd been cultivating, all of it collapsing around him. Mom, he said quietly. The microphone picked it up anyway. Please, you thought I'd die on that operating table, I said. My voice wasn't loud anymore. I didn't need to shout. Everyone was listening. You thought you'd inherit everything and no one would question it. You waited until I was at my most vulnerable. You waited until I couldn't defend myself. And then you stole everything. The doors at the back of the room opened. Lawrence walked in with Raymond beside him. They moved through the crowd toward the platform. Brandon Anderson, Lawrence's voice carried across the room. I'm Lawrence Kim, representing Beatrice Anderson. This is Detective Raymond Foster. We need to speak with you about falsification of documents and real estate fraud. Brandon backed away. He literally backed up until he was at the edge of the platform. Mom, don't do this. I'm your son. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught. He didn't answer. Raymond stepped onto the platform. He didn't handcuff Brandon, didn't arrest him. This wasn't that kind of intervention. But his presence, the weight of what was happening, that was enough. Mr. Anderson, the sale of the property has been voided, Lawrence said. The title company has cooperated fully. The funds you received were obtained through fraudulent means. You'll need to return them immediately. I spent it, Brandon whispered. Then you'll need to liquidate your assets, Lawrence said calmly. The Porsche, the jewelry, any other purchases made with the fraudulent funds. If you can't make full restitution, there may be additional legal consequences. Monica ran. She pushed through the crowd and disappeared through the doors. Some of the guests followed her. Others stayed watching like this was entertainment, not someone's life falling apart. Brandon looked at me one more time. I really am sorry, Mom. So am I said. He walked off the platform, Lawrence and Raymond on either side of him. I watched my son leave. Watched him walk through a crowd that parted for him like he had something contagious. The doors closed behind them. I stood alone on the platform, holding the microphone I no longer needed. The remaining guests were leaving now, quickly, quietly, trying not to make eye contact. Within 10 minutes, the ballroom was empty except for the bartender and a few waiters who were starting to clean up. I set the microphone down and walked out. Nobody stopped me. Nobody said anything. In the parking lot, the sun had fully set. The boats in the marina bobbed in darkness. I got in my car and sat there for a long time, my hands on the steering wheel trying to process what I'd just done. My phone buzzed. A text from Lawrence. Are you okay? I didn't know how to answer that, so I drove home instead. The week after the party was a blur of lawyers and paperwork and phone calls. Brandon called me 37 times. I didn't answer. He left voicemails. At first they were angry, accusing me of ruining his life, of humiliating him publicly. Then they became desperate, pleading. By the end of the week, they were just sad. Mom, please, I need to talk to you, please. I listened to every voicemail. I saved them all, but I didn't call back. Monica filed for divorce 3 days after the party. She wanted nothing to do with the legal mess Brandon had created. According to Lawrence, she was cooperating fully, returning jewelry, providing documentation of everything Brandon had purchased. She wanted to distance herself as much as possible. Brandon had to sell the Porsche. He'd bought it for $180,000, sold it back to the dealership for $150,000. The jewelry went back to Cartier. They refunded most of it since it was still unworn tags, attached clearly, bought for display rather than sentiment. The $400,000 deposit on the Palm Springs villa was gone. Non-refundable. Brandon lost it all. Even after liquidating everything, he was still short $200,000. Lawrence worked out a payment plan. Brandon would pay $5,000 a month until the debt was cleared. It would take him 3 years. The house ownership was restored to the trust. Lawrence helped me restructure everything, make it absolutely ironclad. Even if I died tomorrow, Brandon wouldn't inherit a penny. Everything would go to the Gerald Anderson Memorial Trust, which supported heart disease research. I should have felt victorious. I'd won. I'd exposed Brandon's fraud, recovered my money, protected my home. But victory felt hollow. It felt like loss dressed up in different clothes. 2 weeks after the party, I agreed to meet Brandon one final time. He suggested my house, but I said no. Too many memories, too much history. We met at a coffee shop in Santa Monica neutral territory, mid-afternoon on a Tuesday. The place was nearly empty. Brandon arrived 10 minutes late. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight. His suit didn't fit right anymore, hanging loose on his frame. He hadn't shaved properly. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He sat down across from me. We didn't hug, didn't touch. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been shouting, or crying. I nodded, but didn't speak. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me." He was staring at the table, not at me. "What I did was unforgivable. I know that. I just need you to understand why." "Why you stole from me while I was in surgery?" He flinched. "Monica wanted a certain lifestyle. Her friends, the people she follows online, they all have money. Real money. She kept comparing our life to theirs. We couldn't keep up. I felt like a failure. So you decided to steal." "I thought you were going to die." He said it so quietly, I almost didn't hear. "The doctor said 60% success rate. I thought, what if this is it? What if you don't make it?" And then Monica said, "Why wait? Why not get ahead of it? It was Monica's idea." "No." He shook his head quickly. "No, it was mine. I can't blame her. I'm the one who forged the signature. I'm the one who created the shell company. I wanted to prove I could give her everything she wanted. I wanted to be successful without having to actually work for it." At least he was being honest now, when it was too late to matter. "You waited until I was at my most vulnerable," I said. "You knew I couldn't stop you. Couldn't even know what you were doing. That's what hurts most, Brandon. Not the money, not the house. The fact that you looked at your mother lying in a hospital bed and saw an opportunity." He was crying now, silent tears running down his face. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I was desperate and stupid and selfish." "Yes, you were." We sat in silence for a long time. The coffee shop's music played softly, smooth jazz that felt inappropriate for this moment. "Can you ever forgive me?" Brandon asked finally. I thought about it, really thought about it. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I still love you. You're my son, but love doesn't mean I have to trust you or let you hurt me again." "What does that mean?" "It means you need to learn to stand on your own, without my money, without shortcuts. You need to figure out who you are when everything is stripped away." "I don't know who that is." "Then you need to find out." I stood up. Brandon stood too, reaching for me. I stepped back. "Mom, please, don't leave like this. There has to be a way to fix this." "There is," I said. "You fix yourself. You become someone who doesn't need to steal from his own mother. You build a life based on something real, not on fraud and forgery. And maybe someday when you've done that work, we can talk again." "How long?" "I don't know, years maybe, or maybe never, that's up to you." I walked out of the coffee shop. Brandon didn't follow me. I got in my car and drove away without looking back. If he was still sitting there, if he was watching me leave, I didn't want to know. 6 months passed. Seasons changed. Summer faded into fall. The roses in my garden bloomed one last time before going dormant for winter. I sold the beach house in October. I couldn't live there anymore. Every room reminded me of what Brandon had tried to take, of Gerald, who would have been heartbroken by what his son had become, of the life I'd built that had been violated so completely. A family from San Francisco bought it for $2.4 million. They had 3 children, a dog, and plans to make it a vacation home. They loved the roses, loved Gerald's studio, loved the view of the Pacific. I felt good selling it to them, like the house would have a second chance even if I couldn't. I bought a smaller place in Pasadena, a 1920s bungalow with original hardwood floors and a garden big enough for vegetables and herbs. No ocean view, but I had mountains instead. The San Gabriels turning purple in the afternoon light. With the money from the sale, I fully funded the Gerald Anderson Memorial Trust. It now provides grants for heart disease research specifically for valve replacement procedures. The thing that saved my life would hopefully save others. I started volunteering at Cedars-Sinai, the hospital where I'd had my surgery. I visit patients in the cardiac ward. People facing the same fear I'd faced, wondering if they'd wake up after surgery, wondering what life would look like on the other side. I tell them about my experience. The pain, yes, but also the healing, the way strength comes back slowly, the way breathing gets easier, the way life eventually returns to normal, or a new version of normal. Margaret visits twice a week. We have coffee in my new garden, talk about books and politics and everything except Brandon. She knows better than to bring him up. I joined a support group for people who'd been betrayed by family members. Financial exploitation is more common than people think. I met others like me, a woman whose daughter had emptied her savings, a man whose brother had forged his name on loan documents. We shared our stories. We cried together. We reminded each other that we weren't stupid or gullible or bad parents. We just loved people who hadn't deserved it. I learned about boundaries, real boundaries, not the kind I'd pretended to have while giving Brandon everything he asked for. I learned that saying no isn't cruel, that making someone face consequences isn't unloving, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them fail. Brandon sent me letters, one every month like clockwork. I didn't read them at first. I'd see his handwriting on the envelope and put it in a drawer unopened. By December, I had 6 letters stacked in my desk. On Christmas Eve, alone in my new house, I opened them. The first letter from July was still angry, blaming me for ruining his life, for humiliating him in front of his colleagues, for being vindictive and cruel. I put it aside. The second letter from August was different, apologetic, explaining that Monica had left, that he'd lost his real estate license pending an ethics investigation, that he was working as a sales associate at a car dealership, making $12 an hour plus commission. It was humbling, he wrote. He was learning what real work felt like. September's letter talked about therapy. He'd started seeing someone trying to understand why he'd made the choices he'd made. He was learning about entitlement, about the damage caused by never facing consequences. October's letter was shorter. Just a few lines saying he'd paid off another $5,000, that he was on track to finish the payment plan in 3 years. He was proud of himself for following through. November's letter mentioned that he'd started coaching youth soccer on weekends. Volunteer work. Something to give back, he wrote. The kids didn't care that he'd been in the news for fraud. They just wanted someone to teach them how to kick a ball. December's letter arrived on the 20th. I opened it on Christmas Eve, sitting by the fireplace in my new house, a glass of wine beside me. Mom, it began, I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just want you to know I'm working on becoming someone you could be proud of someday. I'm not there yet. Maybe I never will be, but I'm trying. I got a promotion at work. Nothing fancy, just assistant manager at the dealership, but I earned it. Nobody gave it to me. For the first time in my life, I'm succeeding because of my own effort, not because of money or connections or your generosity. It feels different. Better. I'm sorry for everything. I love you, Brandon. I sat there holding that letter for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside, someone was singing carols. Christmas lights twinkled on houses down the street. I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. The possibility that someday, years from now, I might be able to sit across from my son again and see someone different. Someone who'd learned and grown and changed, but not today. Not yet. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the drawer with the others. I didn't write back. I wasn't ready. Instead, I poured myself more wine and thought about Gerald, about what he'd say if he could see me now. I think he'd be proud. Not of what happened, but of how I'd handled it, of how I'd stood up for myself, of how I'd let Brandon face consequences while still leaving the door open just a crack for possible redemption. I looked around my new home. Smaller, yes, different, but mine, truly mine, earned through my own work, my own choices, safe in a way the beach house had never been after Brandon's betrayal. I thought about the lesson I'd learned, the one I'd paid $2.3 million and a broken heart to understand. Love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just enabling someone to hurt you. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the people you love most so they can learn to stand on their own. My heart, my physical heart with its new valve beat steady and strong. The surgery had saved it, but the real healing, the kind that mattered, came from learning when to hold on and when to let go. I still didn't know if Brandon and I would ever have a real relationship again. Maybe we would. Maybe in 5 years or 10 after he'd proven he'd changed, we'd sit together and have coffee and talk about something other than betrayal and forgiveness. Maybe I'd meet his future children, my grandchildren, and watch him be the father Gerald had tried to teach him to be. Or maybe not. Maybe this was it. Letters, once a month, never answered. A son I loved from a distance I couldn't close. Either way, I'd be okay. I'd survived open heart surgery. I'd survived my son stealing my home while I was unconscious. I'd survived the pain of exposure, of standing in front of 80 people and naming what had been done to me. I could survive anything now. The wine glass was empty, the fire was dying down. I stood up, my chest no longer aching from the surgery, and added another log. Flames caught and danced, throwing shadows on the walls of my new home. Tomorrow was Christmas. I'd spend it with Margaret, cooking too much food and watching old movies. It would be good. Different from holidays with Brandon and Gerald, but good in its own way. I walked to the window and looked out at Pasadena's Christmas lights. Somewhere in this city, Brandon was living his new life, working his dealership job, coaching soccer, trying to become someone better. I hoped he succeeded, for his sake, not mine. But that was his journey now. Mine was here, in this house, in this new life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. And you know what I realized? Something standing there in the dark looking at those lights. I was happy. Not in the way I'd been happy with Gerald, or even in the way I'd been happy when I thought Brandon and I had a good relationship, but happy in a deeper way. The kind of happiness that comes from surviving something that should have destroyed you and discovering you're stronger than you knew. So if you're watching this, and you've been betrayed by someone you trusted, someone you loved, I want you to know something. It's okay to walk away. It's okay to say no more. It's okay to protect yourself, even if it means disappointing people, even if it means being called cruel or unforgiving. Your healing matters more than their comfort. Your safety matters more than their expectations. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for them, is to step back and let them face the consequences of their choices. Will they change? Maybe. Maybe not. That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to yourself, to your own heart, literal and metaphorical, to your own peace. I learned that lesson the hard way. I hope you don't have to. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you loved? Have you had to walk away from family? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button. Subscribe for more real-life stories about navigating difficult family situations. Share this with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it wasn't easy to hear, it wasn't easy to live, but if it helps even one person understand they're not alone in dealing with family betrayal, then sharing it was worth it. Take care of yourselves. Protect your hearts. And remember, boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. You get to choose who walks through. Until next time.